Sup, y'all? So, with the coming of the new year, there were many anime related channels that were discussing which particular animes they felt were the best of the decade or the best of 2019, etc. But what I want to do is I want to take a quick moment to discuss a very different topic, a very serious topic, a topic that has divided weebs and otakus worldwide for millennia. And this topic, of course, ladies and gentlemen, is which form of media is best between anime and manga. Now, of course, this isn't going to be a video in which I will argue that you should consume your media the same way I do. I understand that ultimately this choice comes down to every individual's personal preference. However, I do want to take a moment to discuss something that I realized while I was watching one of the most highly acclaimed anime of this decade. And this anime, of course, being JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Now, up front, I can tell you that the anime was amazing. I read the manga. I understand how amazing it is. However, I do feel like there were many instances throughout this anime that I felt, or rather, there were many scenes throughout the anime that I felt just weren't as impactful as I originally felt those same scenes were in the manga. And so, again, this topic has been raging for many years. And there are many manga readers, so to speak, that have noted that in many cases, many anime adaptations tend to either exaggerate or diminish key moments in the storyline. An emotional scene, for example, can have the emotion just exaggerated to a comedic extent almost, or vice versa. The emotion could just be completely sucked out of the scene for various reasons. And so what I want to do is focus on that aspect of the discussion for this particular video. This ever existing issue as I see it within anime, I simply found all too present within JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. So without further ado, bros and bro sets, let's get into it. One of the most obvious examples of this emotional mistranslation, as I have termed it, actually happens within the very first episode of the series, and this being the instant in which Dio actually kills JoJo's dog, Danny. And see, it is this one particular scene that gave me the sudden revelation. It is this one particular scene that helped me pinpoint the exact reason that I prefer reading manga over watching anime. But in order to understand why this scene was so impactful to me, we have to back up just a little bit. You see, I myself have a dog. And I love my dog. I love my dog just as much as I'm sure JoJo loved his dog. In fact, if you read the manga or watch the anime, you are pretty much left with the impression that the dog was one of the few good things still left in JoJo's life that brought him any joy. In fact, anyone having a strong bond with their dog can attest to how traumatic of an experience it would be to have some crazy motherfucker who lives in your house toss your dog in a furnace and burn him alive. So, see, when I read over this scene in the manga, my stomach dropped. I was filled with horror. I myself, having a dog, could in a sense relate to the way JoJo might have felt. I can kind of understand what he must have felt because I love my dog, and if that had happened to me, I would have lost my damn mind. And also, the manga does such a good job of establishing the relationship between JoJo and Danny and detailing the backstory between the two of them, that by the time this scene plays out, you develop a real sense of pity, a real sense of sorrow for JoJo. And the point is made painfully clear that the one thing, basically the one thing still allowing JoJo to smile, the one thing bringing him any joy at that point, was viciously taken from him. Every chapter up to that point makes it perfectly clear that JoJo genuinely lost his best and pretty much his only friend. So naturally, I was both curious, super curious, and dreadful of how that same scene would play out in the anime. And well, ladies and gentlemen, I watched the first episode and I have to say I was underwhelmed, to say the least. The very scene that left a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, the very scene that made my stomach churn on the inside, was just casually glanced over in what I also believe is a fairly fast-paced production. And what I mean is this. You see, aside from the dismissal of many important backstory details, because I do believe that the whole series is just a little bit rushed. It feels like a lot of the backstory details were kind of just ignored, and a lot of character development was ignored for the sake of getting to the fighting scenes faster. And so aside from that, I also feel like just the entire scene of Danny's death, this very, very emotional scene for me, was just completely removed. I mean, it wasn't there. If you've only watched the anime, then you don't understand how grim that scene actually gets. And you see, without all of that context, without knowing how close Danny was to JoJo, by the time you reach that scene, JoJo's reaction just feels, a little stale. His reaction to the killing of his dog doesn't feel as impactful. I keep using that word, but it's just true. It doesn't feel as impactful as it does in the manga. And it is because the anime is just completely removes all context from that situation. You don't understand how much Danny meant to JoJo if you watched the anime, and so honestly, his reaction just becomes stale outrage. He's obviously upset, but overall his reaction is void of any true emotional depth. So if you didn't read the manga, then you don't fully understand the significance of Danny's death. That is my overall point here that I'm trying to make. You just don't understand how significant the dog's death was if you haven't read the manga. And so as I was watching the anime, not only did I feel like that particular scene certainly wasn't what I anticipated, but that, ladies and gentlemen, was when it hit me. You see, the reason that entire scene felt stale to me in the anime was because it didn't carry the same emotional weight that I originally ascribed to it. In other words, it didn't make me feel the same way that the manga made me feel when I read over that same scene. And what I realized was that much of my emotional reception toward manga is specifically determined by the emotions that my mind projects onto the pages. My own imagination is what regulates my emotional reception to a particular scenario. Meaning that when I'm reading, I in a sense I am able to place myself in the character's shoes a little bit easier because I'm reading. And because I'm taking the time to carefully view the details within the artwork, I am in a sense able to view these scenarios through a more personal lens by allowing myself to imagine my own reaction to that situation. And this is what I'm getting at. This entire situation made it glaringly clear that basically the worth or the impact of any emotional circumstance within anime is determined by what is fed to you through the performance of voice actors and the choice of plot elements that a team of producers decided were more necessary to their adaptation. And I hope I'm not being too confusing here, guys, but what I mean is this: as opposed to reading and essentially placing yourself in the character's shoes and interpreting for yourself how that character is feeling. In the case of voice acting, the actor's performance is what sets the emotional tone for a given scene. You understand, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, especially if the performance is good. But my overall point is that the emotional weight behind any particular scene that I would otherwise experience as my own mind would understand it is substituted by the performance of the voice actor. Any scene that I regard to be particularly emotional in manga can only have that emotional weight taken to the extent of the actor's performance. You understand? Therefore, any scenario that I find to be particularly compelling can have its significance diminished for me if the actor doesn't perform the scene with the same level of emotion that I originally perceived it with. And as previously mentioned, this is all beside the fact that producers can simply decide to completely remove any part of the story that I regarded to be particularly significant. And I know I mentioned this before, but I mean, the manga just goes into far more detail for this particular scene. And it's just such a shame that, the anime basically completely removed this scene that was so impactful to me and made such an impression on me that I felt compelled to make this video. And not just that, but it was so raw that I honestly haven't seen very much anime be willing to take a gruesome scene to that extent. I mean, there's something particularly sinister about the killing of someone's pet that I just don't see very many manga series be willing to take that step, if I made any fucking sense right now. But my point is that it's just such a shame to have that that entire scene just completely removed from the manga, and it is precisely because of that, it is precisely for that reason that I just feel like, in my case, again, in my opinion, manga is just the better form of media, because in many cases it's just the most complete version of the stories that I like, and therefore by extension the better telling of those stories. And again, aside from the fact that the voice actors in many cases just don't translate the same emotion that these particular scenes made me feel. So again, guys, this is all just my opinion, and I am not taking anything away from the JoJo anime, because again, the anime was good overall. I mean, after all this ranting, the anime overall, I do believe, is superb. It's one of the best anime out there. I do love it. I do like it a lot. I agree that JoJo is a very good anime that I would recommend to anyone. And again, not to take anything away from anime either, just in general, because in many cases the animation can make a particular story better. I guess my next video will be why anime is better than manga. But those are just my thoughts, guys, and that's honestly why, just in general, I do prefer reading manga over watching anime, because it's just, not only is it the source material, not only is it usually the better telling of the story, and that it's the most complete version of the story, but just the fact that I don't have voice actors acting out the emotions for me just make me just having more personal connection with these stories that I'm reading. And so, honestly, guys, if you made it this far, thank you. I really do mean that. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Mwah.